So let me just kind of start the session. Hello, everyone. I am Nick Lippis. Nice to meet you all. And we're going to be talking about something a little bit different from the rest of the sessions. We're going to be basically talking about SDN in the enterprise marketplace. Not kind of the high-end marketplace, but kind of like the core center of the enterprise market. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of framework, context to the session. So please bear with me for just a few minutes or so. I discovered a new word, and I wanted to share it with you all. It's called epoch. You can all say it. Yep. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Epoch. And let me explain what Webster, kind of how they define it. They basically define it as a period of time in history, typically one marked by notable events or particular characteristics. Second definition, of being a distinctive period. The history of someone or something. Now, I've been working with some of the SDN pilots and some of the SDN companies, and I'm starting to believe that we are entering into a new epoch. And let me describe that for a second. The first epoch was very application-specific networking, and it was driven by a computing model of mainframes and terminals. And that drove a certain kind of networking. It drove the first sneaker net, BatchNet, then BiSync and SNA and multi-point networks. For those who've been in the industry, you kind of remember those kinds of networks. The key thing about this, it spanned almost 35 years. That was this first epoch. And also all the other networks, the public switch telephone network, the national entertainment network, were all separate, different networks, circuit switch networks and a broadcast network as well. The internet really wasn't in its existence during this time frame. Key thing too, if you look at IBM, they say about $20 trillion flowed to IBM in terms of applications or flows developing applications and labor on top of KICS and CMS for applications over SNA. Now, there's a lot of inertia to changing these architectures. And so you'd have to have some real challenge to that. And so in that period, kind of like in the early 80s, mid-80s timeframe, what you heard from a lot of MIS departments was it takes too long to develop applications. They come in, they're over budget, they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, and they're usually missing the mark. And the glass house is bloated. It's an embarrassment of riches. It costs too much to kind of do business in this kind of way. And also as the new generation, when this new epoch was starting to occur, and then a mantra started to develop, saying that this network is just too rigid. It's not flexible enough, which kind of ushered in the second epoch. And I call this kind of the general purpose networking epoch. And it also has spanned about 35 years. And frankly, it's been a golden age in our industry. All right? Driven by PCs and client-server computing, we had local area networks developed in the early 80s. We had TCP/IP standardized in that time frame as well. We then started switching and routing and aggregating layer 2 and layer 3 networks. And this became so huge, it became essentially the black hole in which all other networks got sucked into. Public switch network now is mostly an IP network. The national entertainment network is quickly evolving into an IP network as well, a layer 2, layer 3 IP network. But we're starting to hear the same kinds of things we heard in the mid-1980s. And that is, it's difficult to spin up applications. It takes too long. You can't move workloads around. The cost, especially operational cost, not the capital cost. I don't hear that much complaining about the TCO, about 25% being capital and about 60% being operational cost. But it's that 60% of the operation cost that companies want to just crush. And we'll hear about that in this session. And now, just like years ago, the same thing I'm hearing as well is that these networks are they're not flexible enough. They're too rigid. And so what's kind of driving this third epoch? Well, it's clearly we're in a different era of computing. We're into mobile and cloud computing and virtualization. We've been hearing about that for the last day and a half. And the new kind of networking is a software-defined network, and it has very different attributes than we've had in the layer 2, layer 3 networks. To be able to basically virtualize and then customize these virtualized networks. And you've been hearing about this in the last day, and we'll talk a little bit about this in this next session, but to be able to program networks and make them a lot more flexible than they are today. To create an ecosystem of software developers that inject innovation into this marketplace that we've never had before. And also to crush, really reduce operational cost, and then of course near-term requirements to have workload mobility move independent upon where they are geographically. So are we on the beginning of a new epoch? But there's also a lot of established vendors are going to start to look at making layer 2, layer 3 networks programmable as well, with agents and APIs on their existing products that may try to address about 80% of the customer requirements. They are so dialed into this right now, as you all know. So, and also these architecture shifts take a long time. You know, they last a long time, but it takes a while to get them going. So what we're going to understand, I think, at the end of this session, we're going to take a little journey together. And that is, one, is SDN the third epoch? Or is it a new set of features to existing L2, L3 networks? And I think at the end of this, we'll probably get a good understanding of it. Before I introduce the first speaker, let me get a show of hands. How many think SDN is the third epoch? Show of hands. I'd say that's probably about almost half the room. And I'm assuming the other half thinks it's essentially a set of features to existing L2, L3 networks. And get a show of hands on that one. Yeah, that's about a quarter. So the other quarter doesn't know what it is. So, OK. OK, great. Let's start. We're going to have Matt Davey come on up. He is from the University of Indiana. Matt has been deploying SDN, and you're going to get a real good sense of like a real live network and the value that SDN is delivering for them. Then we're going to have a very different presentation. It's really from Eric Murray, who is a system architect and a system network, or system architect there, $6 billion company. They haven't deployed SDN yet, but they're going to share with you the difficulties, the rigidity, and the lacks of flexibility that they experience every day, and what they would hope that SDN will deliver to help them. And then we're going to hear from a couple of different vendors. We'll hear from both IBM around OpenFlow in the enterprise, and then we'll also hear from Juniper around, again, their SDN strategy, and also Jim Harding. And we'll spend a little bit of time on Jim Harding at the very end. Without any further ado, please help me welcome Matt Davey to the podium.